Looks like we're back with our old friend, the PS Vita, and I'm sure this will be a huge nostalgia trip for the three of you that actually purchased one. Sporting a solid selection of games like, anyways, okay, maybe the Vita doesn't have a ton of games, and maybe Gravity Rush is still confined to a wheelchair from carrying the system on its back, but if we look at the Vita's big sister, the PS3, and its major mascot, Nathan Drake, it's no surprise that Uncharted got a Vita game. Now, something that makes Uncharted Golden Abyss different from some of the other games in its field is that it was built for the Vita and stayed there. Amazing Spider-Man is impressive for condensing an open world down enough to fit it on a handheld, but the frame rate makes it clear that it wasn't made for it. Liberation, which we already covered on the channel, was fortunate enough to get ported to other consoles, but Uncharted Golden Abyss, on the other hand, is lost in its very name. As in order to record this very video, I had to purchase a Vita, mod the shit out of it, and actually get the game. All to bring it to you at a low resolution with no audio. Point is, this game is relatively forgotten simply for the few people that grabbed it, and for how inaccessible it is nowadays. That doesn't mean it doesn't have a following, as, well, here I am making a video on it, but its following is likely to dwindle over time because of the expensive prerequisites to playing it. And this is a damn shame, as the game is surprisingly solid and in a lot of ways feels like a proper entry to the Uncharted series, innovating on some parts of the gameplay but being bogged down by certain shoehorns. It's these aforementioned prerequisites that encourage me to say that this is a game you can't play. I know, okay, you can, but most of you aren't gonna drop the 200 Canadian coins to pick up a Vita. Oh, and I can see the comments now, but Aqua, you could just emulate the Vita. And no, my poor optimist, you can't, because like any first-party title, this game forces system-exclusive gimmicks down your throat like feeding vegetables to a toddler, and one of them is a puzzle where you have to hold your Vita up to a light source. And you can't emulate that. So here I am to tell you all about this game so you can play it vicariously through me. I'm sure this will surprise you, but the game actually doesn't play that bad. And it feels like an Uncharted game, which I think is important. The game's biggest downfall is the system it's on. The shooting here feels like Uncharted, for better or worse, but the main issue is these little thumbsticks. They're so small that precise aiming is tough, and this is coming from a proud owner of baby hands, so if they're too small for me, then they're definitely too small for some of you bigger fellas out there. The point is, it just made playing the game tough, and the aforementioned light source puzzle, which, by the way, barely worked, I had to put my phone flashlight up to the Vita's camera, means playing this on the PS TV is also off the table. With the 3 Uncharted games I've covered up to this point, I had the nostalgia for the games as I played them when they were released, but that isn't the case here. This is my first time playing this, and because of it being a bit more of an obscure title, I don't know what the general consensus was at the time, or even right now. All I can go off of are the mainstream outlets, and we know what kind of reputations those guys have. So let's take a look back at the game lost in the Golden Abyss, and let's ask a few questions. Does this feel like an Uncharted game? Does it feel like a spin-off or a proper entry? Of course, is it fun? And who is this made for? Let's tackle that last one, because I'm struggling to find an answer, and I don't want to hear anyone say, Uncharted fans, cause no shit it's made for them, but I mean, what's the largest appeal of the Vita? Probably portability. Take a PlayStation 3 experience and play it on the go. Now perhaps this is me lacking creativity, but I can think of only a few places where I'd want to play a Vita game. The first is in bed. You're tired, and you just want to doze off while finishing up a quest. The other is maybe while busing or skytraining to your destination. 20 minutes of downtime makes for a quick session, or alternatively, a long car ride. One a lot of you are probably thinking about right now is when you're out with friends. I mean, look at some of these trailers. It shows people sitting in a lunchroom playing their Vita, and eventually a group forming to play with them. Unfortunately, this doesn't happen in real life. Here's an anecdote for you. I used to work at a department store, and in the break room, a coworker of mine would always play his Nintendo Switch. Just mind his own business and play Breath of the Wild on his lunch break, and yet he was constantly belittled by coworkers for it, with people calling him a man-child, a virgin, and a loser for playing with what coworkers called a toy. Then, the next week, I brought my Switch to work, and I played on my lunch break right next to him. And guess what? I got mocked too! Look, I get it. It's 2022, and nerds are winning. Superheroes are becoming more popular and so are their games, but we are still not at a point where gamers can just mind their own business and engage with their hobbies in public, so I don't really feel like playing my Vita in public. It's not about being insecure about being a gamer, but I just don't want to deal with the bullshit. But I could see someone playing it on the bus assuming they don't mind the social repercussions. It makes sense, and in fact, Golden Abyss has 34 chapters, most being 10 to 20 minutes, which is perfect for those wanting a quick pick up and play session. The problem with this is the amount of gimmicks here that force you to move around, and in rather unflattering and disrupting ways. The light puzzle is a prime example. What if you're playing at night, or are not near a bright light source? To be fair, this is the only time the light source is used, but what about when you have to tilt the Vita near 90 degrees to not fall, or swipe like a maniac to defeat an enemy? I don't imagine that's easy when you're crammed next to someone on the bus. The same goes for when you're in bed or lounging around. I'm trying to chill out and possibly sleep, not tilt myself 90 degrees. I see this so much with portable consoles. They market the product for use in public or away from the ideal console, but then make playing that console the most distracting activity. This is less of a problem with Golden Abyss and more a problem with the console, I will admit. So why don't we try and answer another question I had, which was, does this feel like an Uncharted game? Most would say that it's called Uncharted, so of course it is, and I agree. Even if it's called Uncharted Fortunes and Frolics and Nathan Drake has to dance his way to the treasure, I'd say it's an Uncharted game just by name alone. But the point of the Vita and a lot of the games was to deliver the home console experience on a tiny device. So how well does Golden Abyss do this? Remarkably so. Keep in mind, this wasn't developed by Naughty Dog, but rather Bend Studios, though they were supervised by Naughty Dog. And this was developed alongside Uncharted 2 and some of Uncharted 3. This is why, while the game feels familiar, it doesn't feel like Uncharted 3, which had the tightest controls and gameplay of the starting trilogy. It feels more like Uncharted 1 than it does 2, but that is still impressive. Drake moves like he should, shoots like he should, and cracks one-liners like he probably shouldn't in most scenarios. There are a few moments and animations here that feel new compared to those that were ripped from Uncharted 1 and 2, and they certainly look a little out of place, but in motion you'll feel right at home. Golden Abyss has all the tried and true elements of an Uncharted game, from the guns, the enemies, the set pieces, and the platforming, and unfortunately the story as well. The only major difference between this game and the others is that it doesn't have a supernatural force at all. There's also, of course, the introduction of new characters Chase, Dante, and some general whose name I don't remember, and trust me, you won't either. This game takes place before Uncharted 1, so it has a lot of freedom to deviate from the usual suspects, and I appreciate that characters like Sully aren't even mentioned until over halfway through the game, as to let other characters take the spotlight for a bit. As far as gameplay goes, this feels like Uncharted 1.5. It has the jungle jaunting that the first game offered, but it has the set pieces and further refined movement from the second game. The movement, much like a lot of the gameplay here, is generally untouched, except there's a strange restriction placed on it here. The game doesn't let you make an incorrect jump, at all. If on a platform, the game will in some cases, not all, not let you just drop or jump off. You need to scale down a dedicated path, and even then you can't just drop from a ledge to the ground. You need to drop from the closest ledge to the ground, which just felt restrictive for no reason. There were also many points where the game just does the heavy lifting for you. When crossing platforms, you can just press X, and the game will make sure that Nate always ends up in the right place, which removes the challenge and subsequently the point of platforming. I'm not saying the other Uncharted games have been some Kaizo Mario platformer, but there was at least some area for the player to fail. Here, there isn't, and perhaps that's a nitpick, and besides, if you don't like it, then just don't do it. One of the gimmicks this game has, and this one is truly for no reason, is the ability to tap a handhold on the screen and Nate will just climb to it. I understand the idea behind it, and the climbing never really took any technical mastery to begin with, but why just allow us to skip it entirely? It seems to be a running trend with Vita games, like Liberation, which gives you the ability to just skip combat encounters despite the combat in the game being easy as hell to begin with. Another gimmick the climbing has shoehorned in is when a ledge breaks away or when Nate loses his grip, you have to swipe on the screen to catch yourself. It's completely unnecessary, but it didn't happen enough to bother me, and the same goes for the swiping to cut down some bamboo, or rope, or the swiping to open doors, or the swiping to defeat enemies, or the swiping to clean objects, or the swiping to complete charcoal rubbings, or the... Okay, I think you get it. Each individual use of swiping isn't overused, but there are so many contexts here that you end up doing everything short of swiping up on the screen to wipe Nate's ass. But I can forgive it, because there are things going on in between the swiping. But this is thrown out the window in the last few moments of the game. Spoilers ahead, but let's be real, if you haven't played this yet, you probably never will. There are two antagonists in this game, Dante and that general, and both of these boss fights are dealt with through a QTE, but not just any QuickTime event, but through swiping in different directions on the screen. It's terribly boring and pretty frustrating too. Against Dante, you have 3 X's that indicate the amount of times you can mess up before having to restart, which makes sense because these can be lengthy, and they are present against Guerrero. Yeah, that's his name, I remembered it now. But halfway through the fight, you lose all of your X's. This isn't a huge problem. Something to note about these fights though, and the Dante one before it, is that when the X's disappear from the screen in his fight, minutes earlier, it meant that the fight was over. In Guerrero's fight, this is not the case, so I let my guard down, only to miss a swipe and have to restart the entire thing. If you want an idea of how I felt in this moment, then you're in luck. The capture device I was using couldn't capture any audio, so to remedy this, I just had the Vita on through my microphone. So enjoy my reaction to losing and being sent all the way back to this near 3-minute fight.
Oh my fuck, are you serious? The whole fucking thing again.
So yeah, I wasn't a fan of this fight and the one preceding it. I don't understand why every possible device needs a touchscreen. Tap to climb, swipe to beat up. The only decent use of this is when swapping weapons. You can tap the gun icon to swap weapons on the ground, which worked, as did reloading. Keeping the grenades to the touchscreen worked too, but I wish they only let you throw grenades in combat, because the amount of times I tapped the check mark in the bottom right after solving a puzzle, which because of my screen not registering the tap I had to do multiple times, led to me accidentally killing myself with a grenade, and it was embarrassing. Many of the puzzles here also require your grubby little fingers. Some see you rotating and cleaning an object, others see you rotating and placing shards of paper to recreate an image, and others see you moving statues and spinning rings. In most cases, these were mild distractions that I actually liked a lot, or at least a lot more than the previous games. Specifically the one with the statues, as rather than pushing them around, you can just drag them on the touchscreen, making it way more convenient and interesting. Another thing here, and this is genuinely a step in the right direction for Uncharted, is that the puzzles take thought from the player. Let me give you an example. When in a cave with Chase, you have to find symbols that correspond to certain heads, which can be found on statues, and they tell you where they are, but you have to get to them on your own. Once you do that, you go back to the door and use the symbols you found to punch in the answer. The reason this was fun was that it required the player to actually do something. The answer wasn't in Marco Polo's journal. We had to find it. And in the other statue-based puzzle, you had to place them in specific spots. And again, the answer was not given to you. You had to actually figure it out. It was a huge step up from Uncharted 1 and 2, and about on par with some of the puzzles from Uncharted 3. But I'd say the variety makes this game have the best puzzles out of the trilogy so far. 4 is a different story, but we're not tackling that beast just yet. Eventually. I mentioned it briefly already, but the combat here feels familiar and just normal. I think previous criticisms here do still ring true, but they're even more noticeable than before. The reason it's more noticeable is because the shooting is generally worse due to the thumbsticks and controls. On top of that, the gyro controls don't offer as much precision as you'd think. Most gunfights when changing the difficulty just change how often you can peek from cover, and for how long you have to stay hidden. I also take issue with the reworked melee system. It's much the same as Uncharted 2, but now to do a takedown you have to swipe the screen twice. But it can be initiated by both the enemy and you. It's great when you initiate it, but when an enemy is close it'll automatically start, meaning shotgun foes that rush you will not only do damage as they approach, which is hard to stop given their armor, but they'll also initiate melee combat which pulls you out of cover, allowing all the other enemies to open fire as you are kept busy because once you start, you can't stop until the enemy is defeated. Going back to the armored enemies though, the best way to deal with them is to just throw a grenade, but the grenades were often hard to aim, and at times, my press on the screen wasn't registered. So when I'm in a tight corridor and have an armored shotgun enemy approaching me with 5 mercs behind him and I can't get the grenade to work, I'm dead, as the shotgun enemy has reached me and pulled me out of cover. I'd rather have the ability to just shoot enemies that are close instead of being forced to tap and swipe the screen in the most exposing manner possible. Before combat starts, much like Uncharted 2, you can thin the numbers through stealth. Though I felt that there was more scenarios here where the entire segment could be completed in stealth, which I appreciated so much. It's the first area where the game is actually better than some of its contemporaries. The story is also better this time around for lack of a supernatural force, and I really appreciated Chase. The game begins with Nathan Drake and an associate, not friend, named Dante looking for the lost city of Quivira, running into a woman named Chase and a drug dealer named Guerrero along the way. The usual hijinks ensue and we end up ditching Dante to work with Chase instead, and after narrowly escaping Dante and Guerrero, we find out that Chase's grandfather had been searching for Quivira, explaining Chase's motivations. We search for the city, finding Grandpa's dead body along the way, oops, and eventually Chase is kidnapped and Nate turns to Sully for help. They track down Chase and her and Drake discover the city, and discover that the City of Gold is radioactive. Drake defeats Dante and Chase on their way out and reconvenes with Sully for a happy ending. Chase was a great character, who seemed to be the only one able to keep up with Nate in both wits and historical knowledge. It makes their dialogue a specific kind of enjoyable, even calling out Nate's tendency to lecture his companions on what they're doing, offering a slightly meta lens of which to view the dialogue. Dante made me realize that Mark Wahlberg would play him perfectly, and Guerrero was, like Dante, so boring. The thing is, all the Uncharted games have been like this. So in one sense, this is a great version of Uncharted on handheld because Uncharted has always had shitty villains, and especially shitty endings. But in the other sense, I can't with confidence say this is a good thing. On repeat playthroughs, I'll be skipping the cutscenes, especially when some of them are upwards of 5 minutes? I know this is the most bitch-made criticism, and I'm aware that Metal Gear Solid 4 actually exists, but these cutscenes are just exposition dumping, and when this is seemingly built to be played in short increments, having a 5-minute cutscene that could be supplemented with dialogue that takes place during gameplay was so annoying. Not to mention that 2 chapters here are dedicated to only rowing a boat, which is done by, you guessed it, engaging with deep mechanics that require skill, and of course fucking not, you swipe the screen like a madman for minutes upon minutes. The plot overall has very little for me or anyone to really sink their teeth into. I know, deja vu, but I can appreciate the lower stakes here. It isn't some save the world plot. It's just Drake and Chase beating their adversaries to a treasure, and I'm glad they didn't try to do anything more than that. It had the arguably too familiar formula to it, with Drake moving from set piece to set piece with a companion, and when Sully is in the mix it feels one-to-one with its home console counterparts. The set pieces themselves are less so, but I wouldn't be surprised if the hardware is what held that back the most. The game's action scenes are never anything more than an explosion or a collapsing bridge, but anything more than that would likely kill the frame rate, which is already bad enough. There were points here where the frame rate felt like it was dipping into the sub-10 areas, I swear, and while I don't totally care about frame rates, especially on a handheld where so many compromises already need to be made, it got to a point where it made shooting even more difficult in some areas. So I think the answer is quite obvious here. This is a good Uncharted game. It even innovates slightly as you can swing on ropes, which we wouldn't see until much later, and the back eject now sees Nathan diving more often than not, which gives it a bit more flair. This game even has a mission similar to the jet ski mission in the first game, but this time it's on a rowboat and it was so much more fun. It's like a nice apology for the hell we were put through in Drake's Fortune. The only thing separating it from its family is the insistence on shoving the different gimmicks down our throat. And the cutscenes would be a lot more fun if we didn't constantly have this fight for fortune lower third. And now I guess I have to talk about it. A major letdown here is the collectibles. The collectibles in Uncharted have never been much to write home about, but the rewards were where the fun was had. Different outfits, guns, you name it, and yet here, we get playing cards that can be used in Uncharted, the fight for fortune. Look, promote the side game all you want, but when I do things in the game or nab collectibles, having Donut Drake replaced with a digital trading card puts me to sleep faster than... So, barring a few things, the budget and over-the-top set pieces being a major one, this feels like an Uncharted game. And I would, for the same reasons I gave earlier, say that this is a fun side adventure, and a solid starting point for anyone wanting to get into the series. But does this spin-off feel like a spin-off? I know it might be ridiculous to ask that question, but I feel it's genuinely something I see a lot of these days. The worst spin-offs I can think of are Assassin's Creed Chronicles, because they deviate so hard from the normal gameplay that it makes it feel like a completely different game, and not a very good one mind you, with an assassin paint job. On the opposite end, we have something like Persona 5 Strikers. I know this game is new and popular, so the SMT fanbase has to hate it, but it does genuinely take the ideas present in 5 and build upon them with different remixes and mechanics. It makes it a game that, while still a spin-off, feels like a proper game in its own right. Uncharted Golden Abyss feels like a proper Uncharted game that at the last minute was given the title and subsequent treatment of a spin-off. The gimmicks here that involve all the swiping and touchscreen controls, if moved to a controller, would feel right at home. Unfortunately, these spin-off elements are likely what prevent this game from seeing a port, as it would likely take too much work, and nobody really cares enough about it. The plot here has no wider significance, and doesn't influence any of the other games, so even for those wanting to catch up on lore, there's little to offer. It could easily be thrown on the PS5 at 60 FPS like Liberation for $25-$30 price tag, and I'm sure many would be happy with that. Overall, Golden Abyss is a solid entry in the Uncharted series that was held back by the console it resides on. The environments and characters look great and delivered that 2009 graphical prowess, but it also brought along frame rates from 2077. The shooting was much the same, though stealth was surprisingly more viable here, offering more variety. The controls held this back more than anything, as the nimble thumbsticks and dodgy touch controls caused more deaths than I wanted to admit. The story felt right at home with its poor villains, fun dialogue, and forgettable premise, but ultimately the cinematic flair isn't recaptured assumedly from a lower budget and hardware restrictions. I harped on the gimmicks a lot here, but the problem was from the overuse of it rather than the actual gimmick itself. Infamous Second Son had plenty of gimmicks to show off the new DualShock 4, but they never felt intrusive, which is exactly what a gimmick should avoid. It won't be played anytime soon, because it just costs too much and the hassle isn't worth it. But if this game ever comes to PS Now or God forbid gets a port, then I'd recommend it. But for now, this game will still have to be lost to the abyss. Hey, sorry that this was a shorter video, so to keep the outro as fast as possible, I'm going to read out the patrons and YouTube members' names really quickly, and thank you so much, guys, for supporting the channel. So thank you to Squishy Frex, Worshipper of the Olympians, Aiden Spark 77, it's SRTW, Sad AMV, Lane, Daniel Latau, Breeze Over, AB, Ben Conway, Bossy, and Bryce Stevens, Chiefy, Chris, Edgar Sunday, Gonzo Gonzalez, Jade on MP3, Lemur Boy, Mark Short, Matthew Graham, Pyrite, Ryan Hutcherson, Sean Bailey, Tara V, The Gamer Lorian, Olfenor, A45719. Thank you. Greatly appreciated. Yeah, sorry this video was shorter. I just didn't have that much to say, but I felt it was necessary to cover Golden Abyss because nobody has. I think I saw a video from the Golden Boat talking about Uncharted spin-offs that did talk about it. But yeah, I just felt like it'd be neat to cover it because not a lot of other people have. I really appreciate the feedback you guys have been giving me on videos lately. It has been really, really helpful as I try to make them better, and I appreciate the support, you know, like on Patreon, on the comments, on Twitter, all of that stuff. If you want to follow my Twitter, it'll be linked in the description, and it's at thatboyaqua. And yeah, I'm just working hard to try and do better for you guys. And they're not always going to be better, but just know that I'm trying, and I appreciate, I see comments from some people that are like, that I know just from like recognizing the name and profile picture. I'm like, oh my god, these people have been commenting on my videos for like 2 years now, and I think that's crazy, and I'm so grateful for that. So I'm gonna shut the fuck up. I'm gonna get back to working on stuff. Next video will be Black Flag. I hope you enjoyed that. I'm very bitter in that video though. It's not a fun video. But yeah, okay, bye. Love you guys. Take care of yourselves. Stay safe. Bye bye.